After accepting the confession of my crush, I time traveled 10 years into the future. A child with big, round eyes timidly called me, "Mom." I found a wedding photo in a dusty utility room, but the groom in the photo wasn't my crush. It was him. When I woke up from a nap, I found myself in a time 10 years later. I was lying on a strange bed. Just as I was standing there, completely bewildered and at a loss, suddenly a small figure dashed in from outside the door. I immediately lay down on the spot and pretended to still be asleep. The sound of footsteps gradually approached, and then a soft little hand rested on my forehead. A childish voice chattered on about what he had eaten recently, and what he had played with. Just as I was guessing my relationship with this child, the child's next words directly scared me into opening my eyes. He said, "Mom, you've been sick for several days. Why haven't you woken up yet? You don't like Tommy, but Tommy misses you so much. Mom, please wake up quickly. Mom." This child called me Mom. I opened my eyes with a whoosh. There beside the bed was an adorable child, with big eyes and a small mouth, looking at me in horror. Before I could say anything, the child darted away. Goodness gracious. You know, last night I had just accepted the confession of my crush. And now, when I opened my eyes, I already had a child this old. After the child ran away, I immediately picked up my phone and called my childhood friend, Lily. I had no idea what I had gone through in these 10 years. There was very little information on my phone. My former friends had even disappeared from my contact list. The phone rang several times before Lily answered. "What do you want?" The voice was coldly indifferent, a tone I had never heard from her before. I scratched my face. Her aloof demeanor made me a bit tongue-tied. When she saw that I didn't speak, Lily on the other end of the line became impatient instead. "Anna, speak. Didn't you say you would never contact me again?" Goodness, what on earth had I done in these 10 years? I thought for a moment and then said, "Lily, I know you're aloof, but hold that thought for a moment. I just want to ask you, who is my husband?" This was what I was most concerned about at the moment. Lily was silent for a moment. "Anna, didn't you take your medicine today?" Had Lily learned to curse people in a roundabout way in the past 10 years? "I'm serious. Are you not taking your medicine?" "Fine, just stay home and wait. I'm in line for a COVID test. I'll come to see you later." Lily's tone was quite serious. Could it be that I didn't time travel, but was actually ill? And what was this COVID test thing? Why did I have to queue up for it? Just as I put down the phone, a woman who looked like a nanny knocked on the door and asked me cautiously if I felt better and if I wanted to eat something. It seemed that my as yet unmet husband was quite wealthy. I nodded, and soon a series of delicate dishes were placed in front of me. I never expected that 10 years later, I would actually be living the life I had always dreamed of. I tentatively asked about my husband. The nanny looked a bit surprised and only said that my husband was on a business trip and wouldn't be back until next month. This was good news. By the time he came back, I would probably have adjusted to the current situation. I picked up my chopsticks and started gobbling up the food. I have to say, these were all my favorite dishes. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the child peeking in at the door. Thinking that this might be my son, my eyes lit up and I waved my hand and said, "Hey, you, come here." He gave a start and walked timidly to the bedside. Why did this child seem a bit afraid of me? Could it be that I married a rich man and became a stepmother? I scratched my head and tried to speak in a kind voice. "Little one, what's your name? How old are you this year?" The child's chubby little face was full of grievance, as if he couldn't understand why a mother wouldn't remember her child's name. "Mom, my name is Tim, and my nickname is Tommy. I'm 4.5 years old." The surname was Tim's. It seemed that I really hadn't ended up with my crush after all. I continued to ask, "Tommy, I'm going to test you. What's your dad's name?" "My dad's name is Tommy." "So you're here. It's time to go downstairs and study. Don't disturb her." The nanny who suddenly appeared at the door interrupted Tommy's answer. "Mrs. I'm sorry. I didn't keep an eye on Tommy. I'll take him downstairs right away." The nanny came over nervously and pulled Tommy away. I was a bit confused about the situation and could only nod. Ever since I woke up, the nanny's attitude had been strange, as if I were some kind of ferocious beast. Since I couldn't find out my husband's name, I decided to look for clues myself. The bedroom was very luxurious, but there were no wedding photos, and there were no signs of another person living there. Could it be that this was the so-called husband who sent money every month but never came home? When I walked out of the room, I realized that this was a 2-story small mansion. Downstairs, hours, Tommy was quietly leaning against the bay window, playing with a puzzle. The sunlight spilled all over the floor, and he had long eyelashes drooping, looking like a well-behaved child. It instantly melted my heart. I rushed over in one leap, scaring him. "Son, what are you playing with? Mom will play with you." I saw Tommy's eyes widen in surprise, and he immediately stood up as if he were being punished and murmured, "Mom." I pulled him over and planted a kiss on his fair little face. He touched his face, looking a bit delighted. Looking at his series of reactions, I could probably guess that 10 years later, I might not have liked this child very much. Fortunately, Tommy was young and didn't hold grudges. I played with him for a while, and soon he happily started sharing his puzzle with me. "Son, is the puzzle the only thing you have to play with? For a child of this age, there should be a lot of toys." Tommy looked at me timidly and said, "Mom used to think that other toys were too noisy and would get angry." Oh no, I was really a bit crazy 10 years later. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was Lily who had come. When Lily came in, I hardly recognized her. Was this still my too-moish childhood friend? She had not only grown her hair long, but also had a big wavy perm, and her eyebrows and eyes were exquisitely outlined. I widened my eyes exaggeratedly and said, "Beautiful lady, who are you?" Lily gave me a disdainful look. Tommy seemed to be very familiar with her and directly jumped into her arms and called her Aunt Lily. Lily stroked Tommy's little head and said to me, "Come on, let's go upstairs and talk." I quickly led her back to the bedroom. Before she could speak, I took the lead in telling her the whole story. After listening, Lily frowned and sized me up, then asked the crucial question, "How do you know you time traveled instead of having amnesia?" Well, I remember that the last meal I had before time traveling was beef brisket stewed with tomatoes in the school cafeteria. It was so delicious. I remember that I took an exam 2 days before time traveling, and I still remember the questions. If I really had amnesia, I couldn't possibly remember such details for 10 years. Right. Lily raised an eyebrow but still didn't say anything. She knew me as well as she knew herself. I pursed my lips sheepishly and said, "Well, the day before I time traveled, I had just accepted the confession of Alex." Lily's mouth dropped, and she sneered. Then she started rattling off what had happened in the past 10 years. It turned out that 10 years later, I really was ill. I had bipolar disorder, and the reason for my illness was that my ex-boyfriend, Alex, had cheated on me. Lily said that after Alex got together with me, he seemed to be nice to me on the surface, but in fact, he had been secretly manipulating me emotionally. By the time she noticed something was wrong with me, it was already too late. Later, Alex framed Lily for flirting with him, and in my confused state, I ended our friendship, and I was dumped by Alex. When I was 27, his new girlfriend was my college roommate. I couldn't stand it and developed bipolar disorder. Damn, that's so tragic. I rubbed my forehead and sighed. This was simply the tragic first half of Anna's life. Then who is my current husband? This was what I was most concerned about at the moment. Lily looked at me and paused for a moment before saying, "It's Ethan." What? I never dreamed that 10 years later, I would actually marry Ethan. Lily, Ethan, and I had grown up together since we were children. We lived in the same building when we were kids and went to the same school. Ethan had always been the kind of child that other parents praised. He was good-looking, smart, and had a great personality. He would help old ladies cross the road and give up his seat to old men on the bus. At that time, I was young, and the more my parents praised him, the more annoyed I was with him. But as someone who loved good looks, I couldn't help but stare at him, often making him blush. When I grew out of that childish stage and started to have feelings, I did have a crush on him. But there were so many people who liked him, and I could only give up. Even though he had shown me some special treatment, I just thought it was the friendship between childhood friends. What's more, he went abroad later. Now Lily was telling me that Ethan had married me. This shock was no less than a collision between Mars and the Earth. In a flash, I thought of another question. Lily, Tommy is 4.5 years old, and I broke up with Alex when I was 27. Then whose child is Tommy? Lily looked at me with a troubled expression and said, "At that time, we had broken off our friendship, and I could only hear about you from others. I heard that you and Ethan were caught in bed together by Alex. As for Tommy, to be honest, I don't know. The amount of information was too overwhelming, and my brain was a bit overloaded. That is to say, I might have married Ethan while carrying other people's child." This thought made me feel dizzy. No wonder there were only signs of my life in the room. Ethan must have have disliked me a lot. If that was the case, why was he willing to marry me? Something's not right. Lily, Alex cheated on me. How could he catch me and Ethan in bed, even if I was capable of doing such a thing? Ethan wasn't that kind of person. Lily said, I don't know the specific details. It seems that Alex first broke up with you, but you refused to agree. Then he caught you and Ethan together and took the opportunity to turn the tables on you. This plot was too surreal. I touched my face and said, I feel like I have a certain kind of beauty with a lack of brain function right now. Lily patted me. Accept the reality, sister. After being manipulated emotionally, you really became a bit of an idiot. But Anna, to be honest, whether you have amnesia or time traveled, I have only one thing to say. Be nice to Tommy. I can't interfere in your relationship with Ethan, but this child is really too pitiful. Ethan is busy with work and is away from home for half a year. You used to not like Tommy and didn't care about him at all. I started crying. The father might be a possible fake father, but the mother was definitely a real mother. My little angel, Tommy. In the following days, please feel the intense love from your mother. Just as I had finished making my plan to show my motherly love. A few days later, Tommy went to kindergarten. It turned out that he had been on summer vacation before. Normally, a private kindergarten like the one Tommy went to didn't have a summer vacation, but most of the children came from wealthy families, and many parents wanted to take the time to take their children on trips. Thinking of the lonely figure of Tommy, playing with the puzzle downstairs that day, my heart felt as sour as if I had swallowed a lemon. I thought that I must take Tommy out to play in a few days. At dinner that night, Tommy sat on the chair, swinging his little legs, and told me about his day at kindergarten. After a few days of getting along, he wasn't as afraid of me anymore. When it was time to go to bed, Tommy rarely asked to sleep with me. He was wearing a dinosaur patterned pajamas and lay obediently beside me. Mom, tell me a story. I took the book and made up a story on the spot. A long time ago, there was a snow prince. After listening to the story, Tommy smiled and said, Tommy is the snow prince. Mom is the princess. When I grow up, I want to marry Mom too. I teased him, but Mom already has a dad. Tommy can't marry Mom. Unexpectedly, as soon as I finished speaking, Tommy's mood suddenly became very low. That's right. Since I time traveled, I had never heard Tommy mention Ethan on his own initiative. Could it be that Ethan wasn't nice to him? So I tentatively asked, don't you like Dad? Tommy shook his head vigorously. I like Dad, but he looked at me cautiously, and it was obvious that the one who didn't like Ethan was me. That couldn't be possible. Right. One day, after the nanny sent Tommy to school, I started to clean up the utility room. Unexpectedly, I found a wedding photo in the corner of the utility room. In the photo, I had a blank expression on my face, looking like a puppet that had lost its soul. And Ethan beside me, although he was smiling, there was a hint of loneliness in his eyes. It looked really unpleasant. I instinctively wanted to turn the photo over, but then I heard a clatter. A small box that was tucked behind the photo fell to the ground. Out of curiosity, I opened it. Inside were Tommy's birth certificate and the notes I had passed to Ethan during class, as well as a love letter. It was a love letter written by Ethan at the age of 16 to Anna at the age of 16. At that moment, I couldn't tell how I felt. It was like a plate of stir-fried bitter gourd with vinegar. Besides the soreness and bitterness, there was nothing but regret in my heart. This love letter was 16 years late. I stared at it blankly for a long time, then put it back in its place as if nothing had happened. At the entrance of the kindergarten, the teachers were leading groups of little kids. It seemed that children at this age all had a special ability to spot their parents in a crowd at a glance. When Tommy saw me, his eyes lit up, and he waddled towards me like a little duck. He tilted his head back, his little face blushing, and said, thank you, Mom, for coming to pick me up. My heart immediately softened. From now on, Mom will come to pick you up from school every day. Okay, can you also send me to school in the morning? I firmly shook my head. Son, Mom can't get up in the morning. Just then, a little girl ran over and looked at me, asking, Auntie, are you Tim's mom? I nodded. The little girl sized me up and praised, Auntie, you're so pretty, but why have you never come to pick up Tim before? The other kids in the class said you don't like Tim. Before I could say anything, Tommy grabbed the hem of my clothes tightly and said a bit angrily, don't talk nonsense. Mom likes me. The little girl looked at me, then at Tommy, feeling a bit at a loss. I quickly soothed them. After we got home, I noticed that Tommy seemed a bit down, so I bought him a lot of my favorite snacks and promised to give him a big gift on his birthday. Tommy looked at me expectantly and said, great, Dad also said he'll come back. Well, I had just seen the love letter today, and I hadn't even figured out how to face Ethan yet, and he was already coming back. In the evening, following my plan of showing motherly love, I wanted to help Tommy take a bath, but unexpectedly, the child flat out refused. He blinked his big eyes and said seriously, "I have a penis, Mom doesn't, and I'm almost a 5-year-old big boy, so I can wash myself." I pinched his little chubby hand and said, "Really, shampoo getting in your eyes will hurt, and you're still a 4.5-year-old kid." Little Tommy hesitated for a moment but still chose to accept the help from his own mother. He just blushed the whole time and covered his private part. Soon, Tommy's birthday arrived. He was more excited than ever. Unfortunately, the weather didn't cooperate. Just after noon, it started pouring down rain. Ethan was on a flight in the afternoon, and I wasn't sure if he could make it back on time. So I called Tommy, who was staring longingly out the window, over to open his gifts. I had prepared 5 gifts, hoping to make up for my previous neglect of his birthdays. No matter how sensible Tommy was, he was still a child. He quickly immersed himself in the joy of getting new toys. When Ethan came in, I was having a great time driving an electric kid's car with Tommy. "Mom, it's my turn. You said you'd only play for a little while. Son, be good. Mom will play for a little longer." When we heard the sound of the door opening, we both instinctively looked towards the door. Outside the door, it was pouring rain. Ethan came in from the rain, and most of his suit was wet. Tommy called out "Dad," and ran over excitedly. But he looked up at me. We looked at each other from across the room, and my heart started pounding like a drum. Even if I hadn't time traveled, I hadn't seen Ethan for almost 2 years. I had to say, the way he looked with glasses on now was just driving me crazy. A handsome man, wearing glasses, and a wet suit. Who could resist this? I came to my senses and stammered a greeting. Ethan took off his wet coat and directly stepped forward to give me a hug. I was stunned. Was this progress a bit too fast? He whispered in my ear, "Anna, I'm back." I resisted the urge to rub my ear, and immediately hugged him back. Well, this kind of thing between husband and wife couldn't be considered taking advantage. He looked at me in confusion but didn't say anything. By the time I lit the birthday candles, Ethan had just changed his clothes and come downstairs. I scratched my face. I had been preparing to sing the birthday song for a long time, but couldn't bring myself to open my mouth. Tommy looked at me keenly, then at his dad. Then he loudly made a wish. "I hope I can sleep with Mom and Dad tonight." I pursed my lips. "Good son, you really know how to do it." But Ethan looked at me and said to Tommy, "If you say your wish out loud, it won't come true." His reaction immediately dampened my enthusiasm. I had forgotten that Tommy might not be his son. I'm not the kind of person who likes to procrastinate. When Tommy wasn't around, I directly said, "Ethan, let's talk." As soon as I finished speaking, his face darkened. "I'm tired. Let's talk about it tomorrow if there's anything." He had just given me a hug when he came in. Why was he showing me a cold face now? "When it's time for a shower later, I'll go to your room and unplug your water heater." We were supposed to talk the next day, but Ethan started avoiding me from that day on. Every time I woke up, he had already gone to work. "What time do you get up?" "In the coffee shop." Lily looked at me suspiciously. I touched my nose. Getting up at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning was quite normal, wasn't it? Lily asked me if I liked Ethan. I took a sip of coffee to hide my feelings. Back then, when Alex chased me, I agreed to be with him, because he was considerate and handsome. But this feeling was different from what I felt for Ethan. Lily rolled her eyes. "If you ask me, this is all Ethan's fault. If he wasn't so reserved and shy, that jerk Alex wouldn't have had a chance at all." Well, she was right. Rather than blaming myself, it's better to speak ill of others. Just as I was about to continue chatting with Lily, my phone suddenly rang. 20 minutes later, I showed up at the entrance of the kindergarten. There was no other reason. I was just called in as a parent. In the office, Tommy had a stubborn look on his face. Another child was crying loudly. The teacher told me that Tommy had been the one to push the other child down first. The child had a scratch on his hand, and the other child's parents had already been notified. I asked for the reason. Tommy looked at me pitifully, then buried his head in my arms, and said in a muffled voice, "He insulted Mom and wouldn't apologize." For no obvious reason. Why would that child insult me? Just then, the other child's parents arrived. The father said loudly, "Which blind person dares to bully my son?" It was a couple. The man leered at me. The woman immediately became unhappy. She picked up her son and started scolding. "You're Tim's mom. I'm telling you, this isn't over today. Don't you even know who you are? How dare you bully my son?" I raised an eyebrow and said, "It was wrong of Tim to push him, but it was your son who spoke rudely first. Seeing that someone was backing him up, the child across from us stopped crying. His eyes rolled around, and he blurted out, "I didn't insult anyone. Tim's mom is pretty, so she must be a homeworker and a mistress." Children don't really understand what a mistress is. Most likely, they picked it up from what the adults said. "Little one, do you know that if you insult people, the big bad wolf will bite off your tongue when you sleep at night?" The child immediately shut up. The woman said spitefully, "He's just a child. Why are you scaring him? My husband is the general manager of a big company. So what if our child insulted you a few times?" As she spoke, she glanced at me disdainfully. "Besides, the child didn't say anything wrong. You were never around before. Who knows what kind of job you have?" I imitated her and sized her up. "You're really ugly and have a foul mouth." No wonder the child picked up such filthy language. It turns out there's always someone barking like a dog at home. "Who are you calling a dog?" Before I could react, she was about to rush over and grab Tommy from my arms. "You little brat, come here and apologize to my son." I dodged to the side, seeing that the situation was getting out of hand. The teacher immediately started to intervene. As the scene got more and more chaotic, the woman took the opportunity to try and slap me in the face. Just then, an arm suddenly reached out and firmly grabbed the woman's hand. "Did you come here to solve the problem or to fight?" Ethan frowned, looking very unhappy. The man who had been standing by and watching the scene with an indifferent look suddenly widened his eyes. He quickly pulled his wife and started apologizing profusely. Ethan said, "What a coincidence. I didn't expect it to be Mark." It turned out that this so-called general manager of a big company was exactly the supplier that Ethan's company had been in contact with recently. He had a bad reputation for his personal life, and his wife often cursed at home, which had a bad influence on the child. Ethan raised his hand to interrupt them. "You didn't seem to have this attitude just now. It seems more like you came here to watch the show rather than solve the problem. If I hadn't shown up in time, this slap would have landed on my wife's face. I heard that Tim pushed your son. Then go to the hospital for a checkup, and we'll cover the medical expenses. But before that, shouldn't your family apologize to my wife and son?" The two of them immediately started bowing and scraping. I didn't like the way they behaved in front of the child, so I took Tommy and left. When we got home, I thought it was a good opportunity to talk to Ethan. He immediately said, "I still have something to do at the company. I'm going back now." It wasn't going to be that easy. With a command, Tommy rushed over and hugged his dad's leg. Ethan frowned and said, "If it's about a divorce, at least don't talk about it in front of Tommy." I rolled my eyes, grabbed him, and dragged him into the room. I turned around and pinned him against the door. The way he saved me like a hero just now was really kind of handsome. I looked up at him and called out softly, "Honey Tilda." Ethan didn't even twitch an eyebrow, but his face turned as red as a steamed crab. My face also felt hot, and I coughed twice before starting to explain the time-traveling thing. After a while, he said, "Although it's hard to believe, it's a reasonable explanation. Since Tommy's birthday, I've noticed something was different. I thought your change in attitude was because..." Ethan's voice trailed off. "Because I wanted a divorce." "Yeah, it seems that I treated you very badly before. So what exactly happened with the so-called being caught in bed? And Tommy, Tommy is my child. There's no doubt about that. As for what happened in the past, not having those memories might not be a bad thing for you. Honey, husband and wife should be honest with each other." After I said this, Ethan pushed his glasses to hide his embarrassment and spilled the beans. So the word honey was like the password for this shy and reserved man. Based on Ethan's incomplete account, I deduced the truth. Alex had framed me to break up with me. He had set us up. Tommy was indeed Ethan's child. We got married because I was pregnant, but I also hated him because of that. So for many years of our marriage, we had been sleeping in separate rooms. It's getting cold. Let Alex's company go bankrupt. Ethan looked at me happily and said, "We called the police at that time, but we couldn't find any evidence. And you also flatly denied it." In a way, Alex was kind of a talent too. After all, he had unknowingly made me lose my mind and turn into a fool. This was the darkest part of my life. Ethan and I chatted in the room for a long time. We talked about how I used to blackmail him into buying me snacks when we were kids, and how I broke Tommy's toy car the day before yesterday. How did Tommy get his nickname? Ethan's eyes wandered, and he didn't answer right away. Thinking of his academic ability, I asked, "Does it have deep meaning?" His lips moved, and he said a bit shyly, "It's from the cat, Tom. in the cartoon. Tom. I looked at the Tom patterned pajamas casually hanging on the chair and didn't say anything. Such a cute little thing. Who could not love it? At the end of our conversation that day, I didn't have the nerve to ask him to move back to the master bedroom. Regarding feelings, it's better to let things take their course. After all, he's my husband, and he's not going anywhere. As for Alex, before I could even confront him, he sent out an invitation for a class reunion in the university group chat. He even specifically mentioned me. When I saw the message, I wanted to run to the bathroom and slap myself twice. Anna, how could you have been so blinded by such a jerk back then? If I had known it would be like this, I might as well have chased after Ethan when I was a kid. Of course, I was going to the class reunion, but I didn't plan to go alone. I told Ethan about it directly. He asked me what I thought, and I said, first, go and find out the situation, and then get revenge for any grievances. I patted his shoulder. Honey, please make sure to support your wife and make a good impression. Ethan raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. On the day of the class reunion, I originally planned to go with Ethan and then leave quickly, but it so happened that the nanny took a day off, so I had to take Tommy with me. I guess that many people had heard about what happened between Alex and me back then. Afraid that they would say something inappropriate, I asked Ethan to stay in the car with Tommy first. Sure enough, as soon as I showed up, many classmates gathered around me to chat. Some comforted me, while others made sarcastic remarks. I looked at those familiar faces. It seemed like just not long ago, I had seen them full of vitality, but now they were all full of worldly and mercenary air. Thanks to their big mouths, I also learned some things about Alex. It turned out that my college roommate had stolen him away because her family had received a large sum of money from house demolitions, and now he had started his own company, and it was said that the business was doing quite well. Not long after the commotion started, Alex and his wife arrived. Looking at him now, I could only think of a word: relief. Just look at his receding hairline, his protruding belly, and his puffy face like a steamed bun. Where was there even a trace of the campus heartthrob he used to be? With this appearance, how dare he mention me? Anna, you're still as beautiful as ever after 5 years. Alex pretended to be friendly and came over to talk to me. I forced a smile and didn't say anything. I turned around and hid in the bathroom to call Ethan to come up and pick me up. I had lost all interest in any kind of showing off or getting back at him. On the other end of the phone, Ethan let out a soft laugh and said he would come right away. As soon as I walked out of the bathroom, I was startled by a dark figure leaning against the wall. Then the figure spoke. Anna, how have you been these past few years? It turned out to be Alex. I thought someone had moved a big wardrobe to the door of the bathroom. When he saw that I didn't say anything, he even tried to reach out and grab my hand. I wished I could jump up and run a mile away. Stay away. I'm allergic to ugliness. Alex's face twisted for a moment but quickly returned to normal. Anna, are you still mad at me? I had no choice back then. I quickly waved my hand to interrupt him, bowed 3 times in front of him on the spot, and thanked him for not marrying me back then. It was really a great favor. Then I quickly fled back to the party. As soon as I sat down on the sofa, Alex chased after me. At that moment, the noisy scene fell silent for an instant. Then there were whispers. Is this our classmate? What a handsome guy. Was there such a person in our school back then? Whoa. Even the Alex back then was no match for him. I followed the sound and saw that Ethan had come. I heaved a sigh of relief and quickly went over to take his arm. Let me introduce you. This is my husband. Since Tommy was still waiting for us in the car, Ethan and I left after sitting for a while. Looking at Alex and Ethan standing together, they looked like they were from 2 different generations. I sighed. There was never really anything to be sad about in this world. When we were going downstairs, Ethan teasingly asked me if the plan to show off and get back at others that I had arranged was cancelled. I pretended to be tipsy, gently leaned my head on his shoulder, and said in a low voice, we've already won. The evening breeze in the summer night was always very gentle. I suggested that we just leave the car here and the 3 of us go for a walk. So under the dim streetlights, Tommy bounced along and sang loudly, I love you, walking alone in the dark alley. I looked at Ethan beside me, leaned over to his ear, and whispered a few words. He turned to look at me with bright eyes, and his expression was exactly like Tommy's. I smiled and took his arm, pointing at the public electric scooter in front of us, and said, honey, I'm tired. Let's take that home. The gentle expression on his face just now instantly became a bit hard to describe. He looked at the little dress I was wearing and asked, are you sure? I blinked. Ethan had an expression of, I really can't do anything about you, on his face. He took off his suit jacket and tied it around my waist. Then, wearing a shirt, he carried Tommy in front and me behind, and got on the electric scooter. Tommy had never ridden an electric scooter before, and the wind was filled with his happy laughter. But before we had gone 2 miles, our family was stopped by the traffic police. We were fined $20 because the electric scooter was carrying too many people. In the end, we still took a taxi home. Later, after a long time, I saw Alex again. At that time, I was taking Tommy and strolling on the street to eat snacks. Unconsciously, we were attracted by the smell of French fries wafting from the street corner. I scanned the code and found that the person pushing the cart selling French fries was Alex. He also recognized me. With a bitter face, he chattered on about how there were problems with his company's taxes. Most of his customers had left. And finally, the accountant had directly run off with the remaining funds of his company. He had closed the company but was heavily in debt. In the end, this jerk actually tried to cheat me again, but unfortunately, he didn't have the capital he used to have. I suppressed my nausea and said, "Don't worry, I'll definitely help you find a solution when I get back." After I walked away, I directly made a phone call. "Hello, I want to report that there is someone operating without a license here." Watching Alex have his cart confiscated by the urban management, I shed sad tears. What a pity about my French fries. You're bringing Tommy to eat junk food again. Just as Tommy and I were hiding in the crowd watching the scene, Ethan, who had come over, caught us red-handed. I gave a silly smile. We didn't eat. We were just watching the fun. Tommy also chimed in. Yes, Mom and I didn't eat the fried skewers, hamburgers or fried chicken. Tommy was such a smart kid since he was little. Ethan looked at us helplessly and said, "If you want to eat something in the future, just tell me. It's not clean outside." I nodded while ordering food. As the lights came on, the 3 of us slowly walked home. Extra chapter. Traveled back. 1 second I was still snuggled in Ethan's arms, talking about having a second child. The next second, when I opened my eyes, I was back in the dormitory. In a daze, I even answered a morning call. "Honey, get up quickly. Your dear boyfriend is still hungry and waiting for you downstairs." I was startled and sat up directly from the bed. Who was this greasy guy? I remembered. It was the jerk Alex. Just thinking about his appearance 10 years later made me unable to eat for 3 days. So I rushed downstairs quickly and dumped him in full view of everyone. Then I made a phone call to Ethan. The phone rang for a long time before he picked up. After he said hello in a low and hoarse voice, he didn't say anything else. Thinking that I had just officially announced my relationship with Alex last night, I cleared my throat and asked, "Ethan, 1 glance and I can see you, but 1 step feels like a heavy city. What did you mean by posting this message this morning?" Ethan held his breath and didn't say anything. I rolled my eyes. Such a reserved man. "I'm giving you a chance. Don't ask anything. Just answer me. Do you want to have a relationship with me? With the purpose of getting married?" "Anna, I like you. I always have. So why didn't you give me the love letter?" "You knew about it." "I knew about it 10 years later. Because that day, I heard you say in the classroom that you would never like Ethan in this life. That one and only moment of arrogance in my life actually made me pay such a big price. Ethan, actually, I traveled here from 10 years later. You might not believe it, but we were married 10 years later. Yes, and we also had a child." With this straightforward confession, I directly made Ethan fly back from the other side of the ocean overnight. Not only did he confess his love to me again seriously, but he also quickly came home with me for dinner. So, a year after graduation, Ethan and I got married and took beautiful wedding photos. When Lily was my bridesmaid, she kept praising me for being amazing. After getting married, Ethan and I each worked hard and didn't rush to have a child until I was 27 years old. "Is it today?" Ethan whispered in my ear. I hugged his neck and answered in a daze, "Tommy's birthday is today." Ethan was stunned for a moment, and sweat rolled down his face. "Anna, there are 12 months in a year." I tried to understand his words with my already muddled brain. "It takes 10 months to be pregnant." He touched my head and said, "So it should be 2 months later." 12 months later, I finally gave birth to a lovely baby. Ethan named him Tim. Crossing the long river of time, in the miracles that science can't explain, we meet each other again and again. Thank you for watching. The next story will be even more exciting.